unique situation. So I'm going to talk about Amplify, some things I know about it that are basic, and some things that I found in Tulsa, which is our really worst school district in our state. Tulsa, Oklahoma, sad to say, Oklahoma City follows right behind. And when I say worst, I mean lowest academic performance scores consistently for several years since we've had these wonderful experimental reforms rolling out. We pushed back outcomes-based education in the early 90s. I ran for state superintendent at that time and got 49.5% statewide. We happened to not get our election total the night of the election. In a statewide race, it was the only statewide race that wasn't totaled. They're all on the same ballot. They all go in the same machine. So if there's a breakdown, it would be the precinct, the county, or at the state election board. So, would you say there's a problem? Yes, there was a problem. And everyone that had experience working elections and everyone that looked at it closely thought, what is going on? We're talking about a lot of money, a lot of power in education. And sad to say, a lot of our problems are from Republicans who want economic development, they want workforce training, and some years back, decisions were made with OBE, outcomes-based education, and then came Common Core. Following along after that, we repealed both of those from our state law in Oklahoma. So we have some rural districts right now that are still pretty traditional in education. Yes, we're getting the LGBTQ clubs being pushed from the former state superintendent we had. She sent out a directive saying that schools needed to form those to support the students, and the teachers that supported those students particularly should be honored and praised. It was a whole reinforcement system. And at the bottom of the directive from the State Department of Ed, it said that you must comply with Title IX. Title IX is federal law, which was set in law for equal opportunity for women in sports, predominantly. That's what it was for. And so it talks about not discriminating on the basis of sex, Title IX, federal law. But that's way before we heard all of this rights of LGBTQ plus and people promoting a lifestyle and discussing it openly in our classes, and counselors being told not to tell parents when the child had issues with their identity, not to let parents know. That was in one of our frameworks that our past superintendent put out, and it's still there until this superintendent does something. Hopefully he'll be going through that agency. But I'm talking about a lot of money, a lot of power. And in Texas, you've had George W. Bush, his brother, Jeb Bush, governor of Florida, is directly involved in all of this. I don't know how much you see him at the state capitol or at your state chambers of commerce, American Legislative Exchange Council, and all the different groups that they go to. But he is absolutely one of the biggest pushers of so-called education reform. So the idea of Amplify is basically centralized control. We want to measure, gather data, and sort children for their benefit, of course. You know, the Amplify programs are adjustable. They are leveled, they're scaffolded. You hear different terminology used. But that means they're adaptive software. If a student doesn't perform well, they're in third grade, fourth grade, that can be adjusted to a lower level or a higher level. So trying to find out what any particular child gets in the classroom is really an impossible task. Even the teacher in the classroom doesn't know. She may think she does, but unless she's sitting there looking at every screen with every child, they get different things. So that's one of the big issues. Amplify is part of an accountability system for those who want this type of system. It really removes the authority of the teacher. It's a very scripted program. Tulsa has used it for several years. And last year I had a teacher, she is not the first one, several others before her, but she was a 17-year experienced reading specialist from Florida, and she was getting her doctorate at ORU. She called me and said, Linda, I don't know what's going on in this school system. She said, I have third grade, regular third grade classroom. She said, they will not allow me to let the children work individually or in a small group with me. I cannot work directly with the students. They have to stay in the computer. And so one of the third graders right at the first of the year came to her and said, Mrs. B, my computer is broken. She looked, yes, it was not working. So she said, go get a book, Johnny. He said, Miss B, I can't read. She said, it broke my heart. But her job is to follow the process. Back in the 90s, when I ran for state superintendent in Oklahoma, outcomes-based education rolled out from the Federal Department of Education, from a lab. Sounds like COVID. It came from a lab in Northwest United States. And the man that developed it and coined the term OBE, outcomes-based education, was Dr. William Spady. If you go look him up on the computer searches today, you'll find him, and he says that he works with shaman, he works with mystics. This guy is a spiritualist. He was a sociologist. He was never an educator, but he developed a program that was not only in our state law, but in the state law of every state that used North Central Accreditation Association. That's the accreditation of a school. If you're not accredited, you don't get funded. And North Central had been around for 100 years when they put OBE into the accreditation process. And at first, when I started talking about this, and I talked about it because I learned what I had to know as a committee member in a local school district. I'm a teacher, was certified then, of course, had taught in public school, but I had a 1-year-old at home. So I'm a mom on a committee, but I am a teacher. So I asked for literature. I asked for research. What are we doing on this committee? Well, the superintendent was new, and he told us we were going to make a radical change. Well, that was a warning. Thank you, Mr. Garrison, because he told me right up front, a radical change. He was a Democrat. He associated with the Clinton administration. They were just across the border where I lived at that time in Fort Gibson, which was about 60 miles from Fort Smith, and Clinton was the governor of Arkansas, you know. And then he was the chairman of the National Governors Association before he became president. And that's a key thing right there. I'll talk about some more. But I started just asking questions at first. A radical change, well, what does that mean? They won't say that now, of course. This is going to be our version. This is going to be Texas' version. We're going to approve this one. They bring people to consensus by making it so impossible to not be that reasonable person that can come into consensus and agreement. You know, you've got to give a little, take a little, but you're operating within a box the whole time. It's already in a box. When you're going to do Amplify, when you're going to do NWEA, this is controlling the processes that at one time a well-educated teacher who was well prepared and understood education philosophy wouldn't put up with. A good teacher knew how to write lesson plans, how to create levels for students that needed different differentiation. I taught special ed, so I got a lot of that. I had abnormal psych, behavior mod, writing IEPs. I was certified learning disabled, teacher of learning disabled, mentally handicapped, certified to teach them. I had a principal introduce me one time and say, "This is our mentally handicapped teacher." Thank you, Mr. Foster. I wasn't, but I may be by the time I leave. No, that's how you feel sometimes. So I really saw with OBE, I saw a system and a process being brought in that nobody could explain to me, really. Now, Amplify, it's got its website, it's got information, you can read a lot of stuff. But what is it really doing? What is it not doing? What did good teachers do in traditional education that they cannot do with Amplify? I'm going to get a drink. Pardon me. A little dry here. So I saw what was being taken out. And on this committee, I asked the superintendent, we were writing a mission statement, a vision statement, and what was called a comprehensive local education plan. Have you seen visioning plans for your county, zoning, planning? Okay, all of this comes under the lady that's going to come and talk about the World Economic Forum will probably know a lot of that. And all of this does come together. It sounds radical. Well, it is. It's radical, as Mr. Garrison kindly told us up front. The United Nations, the Biden administration from the federal level, and the funds that get rolled out if you do things their way, and the repercussions that come if you don't, they're pretty severe. But again, what is our hope in this country? The people. The grassroots people who will inform themselves and take action and inform others and not be deterred from what they know they see and what they know, regardless of those people that try to tell them, that's not really what this is. It's going to be fine. I'm not saying you can't get some things worked out, but cautiously. Texas went through already C-Scope. Does anyone remember that, C-Scope? Back in 2013 or so. I wrote an article about it because our state superintendent at that time was Janet Barisi. She was on Jeb Bush's foundation board, by the way. Chiefs for Change, his foundation board. And there's a whole lot of money and profit in all this, don't doubt it. Okay, charter schools, curriculum, there are a lot of cottage industries that come with all of this. Software, technology, et cetera, et cetera. But Janet Barisi wanted all of the teachers in Oklahoma to be evaluated with a process from a man named Marzano, Robert Marzano. And he's the one that was the guru in Texas putting together the C-Scope system. So all of your regional education service centers, about 85% of the schools in Texas were on C-Scope coming out of the regional centers, and teachers were told they could not tell parents what you were just talking about a while ago, again, non-disclosure agreement. What? This is our business. Any citizen should be able to know what third graders are getting, what fifth graders are getting. We pay for this. And besides that, it's the minds of our children. And it's the society we will all live in, or are living in, actually. So C-Scope, I don't know if you remember this, but there were a lot of hearings. Dan Patrick had hearings. I don't remember who all else, but Kathy Adams with Eagle Forum. At that time, Alice Lindley with Women on the Wall. There were different ones that I talked to a lot, and we had similar things going on, in each state. So, C-Scope got exposed and pretty much pulled out, I believe. I don't know if it's still operating, but I don't think it is. It was a technology delivery system for curriculum. That's what Amplify and all the technology that goes with it. It's just another one. We're down the road now to a new name, and here's the part of the problem, is that there are some good things that if you could isolate them and pull them out, you might want to do with some children. But when that's your whole system, then you have limited opportunity. Lynn Cheney, Dick Cheney's wife, and whether you agree with him on things or not, but his wife, Lynn, was the head of humanities, the Department of Humanities in Washington, and under George Bush Sr., I believe it was. But anyway, she wrote an article that was wonderful in the fight with outcomes-based education, and she called it Limited Horizons. That's what it was, limiting horizons, because outcomes-based education limited the number of goals, objectives, curriculum, information. Notice how much subject knowledge has decreased. You know, you've got some, I call it edu-training. There's some education, but there's a lot of training. And at the same time, we got what is called the affective domain in curriculum, surveys, programs. Affective is the attitudes, values, beliefs, emotions, and feelings of a child. Do they matter? Are they important? Of course they are. But as a special ed teacher, if we did that type of evaluation for a student, it wouldn't even be done unless there were significant behavioral problems and with parental consent. Then we would set up logical, measurable goals for that student. Johnny won't throw the chair across the room this week, you know, and 80% performance and then up to 90. So there are ways to work with behavior, attitudes, values, and beliefs. But this has gone way far. Let me just tell you what I found in Amplify in Tulsa. I had a teacher call me. This was about 5 years ago when they started using it. It might have been 6. But she called me and said, Linda, I cannot teach this information to my students. I cannot teach this program. My principal is telling me we're not going to have books. It's all online, and there will be no teacher guides, no teacher manuals. So I have to go online, and she said, I've got a key, I'm going to give it to you, and I guess I could go to jail probably in some places today if I did that. But she gave me the key to go in, and I looked, and I read, I studied, and the first thing I see is Common Core. It says Common Core. If you go on YouTube right now, pull up a Amplify tutorial video. Their company produced videos, and it says Common Core right on it. So I heard back in the 90s, Texas doesn't have Common Core. Texas doesn't have Common Core. I mean, people were being told that, of course. But they did have C-Scope. What's the difference? Nothing. It was just set up a different way, you know, with a different name. In the Amplify Core Knowledge, ELA, English Language Arts, curriculum and testing, students will have core information or knowledge about Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. I went into the first grade curriculum. She was a 4th grade teacher, and what she told me over the phone was, I'm supposed to hang up a poster of this Muslim leader in my classroom. And I just can't do that. I'm a Christian. I don't think that's appropriate for this age of student at school. So I go in and look at the first grade, and what I found was it said that they all serve, okay, here it is, Judaism, Christianity, Islam. This is right out of the website, the online curriculum. Identified Judaism, Christianity, and Islam as major monotheistic world religions. What does that mean? One God. One God. Well, technically, scientifically, that is true. Jews believe in one God. Muslims believe in one God. Christians believe in one God. But what do we think a first grader would think? Same God. Oh, they all believe in God. Do we see how dangerous that is? And I'm not saying it's in your Texas version, but it was absolutely in what I read. Locate Jerusalem, Israel, in the area known as the Middle East on a map. These are all first grade level. This is right out of the steps of the curriculum. And a lot of it is read by the teacher at that time and taught with maps and pictures, but still, this is on first grade. As I said, the third graders couldn't even get out of the computer. Identify that a Jewish house of worship is called a synagogue or temple. Explain that Christianity developed after Judaism. Well, I mean, if you don't have a good doctrinal teaching, talk about confusion. And, this is not the kind of church, those of us that go to church, that's not the kind of church we would want to take our child to. It's really an ecumenical, one world, global ideology. It is Luciferian. And the idea that we hear more and more, even at the United Nations, do you know that for the environment, we have ESGs, environmental social governance scores, that banks, financial institutions, corporations, schools, teaching some places, there's a lot of pushback on that in different areas. We need it all across the board and just get rid of those. But those scores get into needing to have the right attitude, the social. The environment, as we know how it's being driven. I mean, I don't know how many supporters of President Biden we have. I'd guess not many, if any. But, the Green Deals and the UN Agenda for Sustainable Development Goals, that takes a certain attitude, doesn't it? And the mindset of the children needs to be formed so they will be good global citizens. In the 90s, back in this committee where I was, they even had that in our literature, that we wanted our students to be global citizens, to be first by the 21st. That was before 2000. That was in the 90s. And I said, we need to put academics in our mission statement. We need to put academics in our plan. Well, no, we can do this. This is a lot deeper and more, more substantial. I mean, there were all kinds of lovely sales pitches about it. And they wanted us to believe that we were creating our own plan there. So now, the volunteer process, you don't have to do this in your school, but here it is, it's free, and you're going to save $1 million or $500,000. That is a bait trap. And there aren't many superintendents that would or could stand against that probably. It takes parents, it takes grandparents, it takes communities to come together as you're doing. I applaud you. That's what you need to do. Identify important Muslim holidays such as Ramadan and some others they named. Tulsa Public Schools continue to advance their education model based on the Common Core state standards, which have been highly opposed and repealed from Oklahoma state law. This was several years after we repealed it, not several, but a few. Former Superintendent Ballard, who was in Tulsa, vowed to continue Common Core, and Superintendent Gist followed his lead. Deborah Gist, in Tulsa, was also on Jeb Bush's foundation board, and she pushes the LGBTQ flag hanging at the administration building. She marches in the parades. She is just very, very far left with everything. She came on and did a video interview about why the Confederate flag was, something that needed to be eliminated, and, renaming of the buildings and bringing down of the statues and all of these things. And what we have is someone that pushes charter schools, pushes getting the public school system deconstructed into a new system. And I'm sad to say, but a lot of Republicans have agreed with whatever other people do just to get that done. There's a great deal of money behind all of it. There's a lady named Nancy Bailey who is a teacher, and she says that Amplify, the SOR, the Science of Reading, which is now in Amplify, it wasn't always in there. And I know I have reading specialist friends that like Science of Reading, think it's the way to go, it's great. I'm not sure that it isn't. I think it is really good. I trust them on that. But as I said to them, you're talking about a model with traditional educators and a traditional classroom where there's an interaction with the teacher with those methods and materials. This is online, and this is a limited amount of information that will get taught and tested and trained. So Nancy says, SOR, Science of Reading, promoters ignore the failure of Common Core state standards embedded in most online programs like iReady and Amplify. CCSS, Common Core state standards, influenced by the Gates Foundation, have been around for years, and they have failed, and there are lots of reports and research that show that, yet we're still using that model. One of the things about all of this, from outcomes-based education, which was really focused on getting equal outcomes, not equal opportunity to learn to the best of their individual ability. That is the American traditional education model. Every child to the best of their ability. You know, it took their determination, of course, effort, but we didn't limit how far a child could go. These programs are a process. They are a limited number of objectives, then they move on. They can't go in depth. They'll tell you, oh yeah, they can go up to a higher level, fine, but it's still a limited controlled thing. I had kids in the 6th grade that could do college level work on some things when I had a traditional classroom. And, you know, a good teacher knows how to let them do that research, especially now that we have computers, go online, do, you know, further research. But this process locks in the teacher and the student. Dr. William Spady said in the 90s, well, I got his writing and took it to the committee. I got Education Leadership Journal. I got different publications where he wrote it, he said it, and I quoted him. And he said, 3 months prior to the meeting I was in, I said from October, whatever year it was, 93, Dr. Spady says the results of OBE are not yet certain. In Education Leadership Journal, but we were doing it. It was in a mandate from our state law because we were in an outcomes-based accreditation process. The idea of students being self-directed, you know, they will teach themselves. This is where some of this is still in place with going online and them teaching themselves online. At that time, first graders in our learner outcomes, it said first graders will monitor their own reading progress. This philosophy hasn't gone away. And Dr. Spady said the teacher will be the guide on the side, not the sage on the stage. What does that mean? Content, knowledge, professional expertise, the ability to know when a philosophy is harmful in curriculum or a method or a material. I just have to say, and I mean, I'm not saying all teachers are there, but it's going toward rewarding people for being dumbed down. Teachers being removed from that level of authority and knowledge and professionalism. And the teachers will tell you the same thing if they're in a system where their administrator pushes it. That's why a lot of good teachers have left the classroom, because they're under that kind of a control system. Back in the 90s, all of this has been developing for a long time. Bill and Hillary Clinton, when he went into office, they had worked with a man named Mark Tucker at the National Center for Education and the Economy, which is a Carnegie Foundation institute. He wrote a letter to Hillary, and I've got a copy of it here. You can go online, just Google Dear Hillary letter, and you'll get it. His name is Mark Tucker, M-A-R-C-T-U-C-K-E-R. And I'm saying this information because it's still relevant. These are ideas that develop and get moved on and get funded more and get embedded in university levels, just like CRT, critical race theory. That's been around for a long time, but not where it got to and where it is now. Mark Tucker said that he's so excited with the work that they've done in Arkansas together, and that they're going to be meeting further with David Rockefeller, who they've been working with, Michael Cohen, who went with Clinton's to the White House and was in the Federal Department of Ed. And they said they want to use a computer database, a labor market information system. Oh, I thought this was about children and them attaining the highest level of academic success they could. No, this is about labor market data. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce even produces videos and literature where they call the students raw material, that they are raw material in the chain of workforce production. They want to improve the gross domestic product. The World Economic Forum is measuring this stuff. The UN is measuring it. There's a non-profit organization called the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD. They do the international testing that compares countries. The United States is being compared with Shanghai now, not now. You know, we've got a whole different world for the last few years, but we've been told for years that they outperform us. Why? Because they hand select some students while we educated everyone. You know, so our scores were never going to be what kids that were just focused on academic success in a small group like that. So these things are being driven from the top down is what I'm telling you. So when you hear the WEF, don't think it's not related to a control system that you're seeing get locked in. Are you seeing in this state law that's out there that you're concerned with, one of them, very much more limiting the control of teachers and what's being taught, right? So this is what I'm talking about, and I think it's important. I mean, we could just be scared and say we can't do anything, but that is not the American way, and that's not how we make things better. And if we fold over to this, then what next? Food, land, water, transportation. Have you heard of 15-minute cities where everything's within 15 minutes? These are not unrelated. Regional government. We have elected school boards. Thank you all for running. Representative government, grassroots, citizen participation, that is what we have. If we had millions, even if we had billions, we can't beat this with money. So we need some money to buy gas and a few things like that, but as far as trying to raise a lot of money to do something, that's futile. What we've got to do is what you're doing, educating more and more people. Another thing that they said they wanted was a system that went from cradle to grave to remold the entire American system. This is education and the economy. You hear a lot of talk about workforce now, right? Well, we care about that. We want our students, our children, to get a job. We want them to go to college. If they go to college, we want them to come out and get a job. We don't want them to not have a job. You know, all that matters. But we've got to step back and look at what's happening and who's at the table with Morath at the Commissioner of Ed. I know, it's the State Chamber of Commerce. There are National Governors Association governors that are Republicans and Democrats, bipartisan. They get into a plan for economic development. And if they're not educators, they don't understand the harm that some of these plans do. When we look at the fact that Common Core is in this Amplify, and it's going to be used school-wide in Amarillo, right? A Texas model? Is that what they're pretty much talking about? Okay. Um, then we are talking about getting this dialectic process. Hegel, have you ever heard of the Hegelian approach, the dialectic process? You've got a point and a counterpoint, two opposites, and they go back and forth until they come together to synthesis. So it's a process, and they have facilitators at meetings that try to facilitate you to come into agreement. So I don't think it's bad to find out what's in the curriculum and point it out, but as far as agreeing not to tell people what's in there, can't do that. What you've done is right. Put it out there. The public's got to know, because if they don't know, then it can sound okay. It can sound fine. In 1993, my first grader came home from school, and he started crying. He said, Mama, I don't want to be a snake. I don't want to be a snake, Mama. I said, you don't have to be a snake. What are you talking about? And he said, everybody else was a snake, but I don't want to be one. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, this man came in our class, and he had on just this cloth. He didn't have any clothes on. And he was an Indian snake dancer. He was a Cherokee snake dancer from the Cherokee tribe. Wilma Mankiller was the chief. And this was multicultural education in the classroom. And my son was not happy. He felt uncomfortable. He didn't want to be a snake. So I wrote a note to the teacher, and I just said I prefer that he observe but not participate. I was very politically correct. Kind of makes me sick now, but, you know, I'm a teacher. I didn't want to insult her. I'm trying to be nice. Well, he came home the next day, and I said, did you give the yes? And I said, what did she say? He said, well, Mom, she started crying. And she went out in the hall and called the principal, and they were both upset. They were both upset. And I thought, goodness sakes. Well, they were both Cherokee tribal members. So here was a, thing they thought all the students needed exposure to this culture. Well, when I ran for state superintendent then and did not win, Governor Keating appointed me Secretary of Education a month later. He won the election in November of '94. And Wilma Mankiller had a press conference and denounced me on behalf of the tribes, saying that I didn't allow my child to participate in Indian education. Well, there were chiefs in the governor's office that day, and they apologized and said we shouldn't have let her do it. Well, they let her do it, and of course they were there wanting something from the governor, so they were real sorry. But on one of the political talk shows, they tried to pin me down about this as though I'd done some horrible, offensive thing. And I had said to the press when they called me, because I didn't even know, that the teacher had told this to, Wilma Mankiller and the Democrat Party. And, and the reporter said, what do you have to say about this? And I said, well, I know the Lord put these words in my mouth because I hadn't thought in advance. I said, I don't think we should use this as a form of entertainment. We should respect it as a religious ceremony. Well, I got calls and letters supporting me from tribal chiefs, other tribal chiefs, and they said, she's just being political. You're correct. One called me and said, Mrs. Murphy, you have taken the correct Indian position on this issue. Because to them it was a sacred dance, and she was trying to bring it in. She was interviewed by the C-SPAN TV while the National Governors Association was in Tulsa meeting, and she said that it was part of the UN multicultural curriculum. She talked about it on this interview, and I heard it later, and I'm like, whoa, this is the UN. Well, it is. It's the United Nations. It is global agreement. It is to have a mindset and work skills that have been predetermined for the children. And I don't know if you have career planning in computer system already, ICAP, or I don't know what you call it here, but there are different programs out there. You just have to look at all of this very closely. And I think that Amplify is part of the top-down control system. If you have a very good teacher, if you have a teacher that will honestly work with you as a parent, then you might find out a lot about what's going on and have some sense of security, and and maybe the administrators won't be required to shut the teacher down from teaching and working one-on-one. I mean, you just have to find out in your own district. But I can just tell you what has happened in Tulsa has been a real crime against these children that are not learning to read, a lot of inner city kids. But here's another thing from the 90s, but this has already happened, so this is not speculation. I was the Department of Labor, Deputy Commissioner of Labor for Workforce Education and Training. After I was in Governor Keating's office for a year, we had the Oklahoma City bombing that year, 1995. So we could talk about a whole lot there, but just to say, you can imagine how hard that was and the work that was done at that time. Well, at the end of that year, the Commissioner of Labor wanted me to come to her agency and be the Deputy Commissioner over Workforce Education and Training, because on the federal level, we had Robert Reich working with the Clintons in the Federal Labor Department. We had Richard Riley in the Education Department, and President Clinton said that those two departments were married together as one, and Reich was the dominant personality. He's very assertive. He has quite a presence. I was in D.C. in meetings where he spoke, and he has quite a presence. He's about this tall, but he got up on the podium, and you would have thought he was, he was quite commanding, very smart guy. He's at Berkeley now, or he was, and Berkeley, as some people have called it over the years, the left coast. I mean, I know there's some good things, but believe me, a lot of this stuff comes out of some of these universities, as we know, and even in our state, some of the same thing. But I went to the Department of Labor, and there I learned a lot. I'd actually gotten a lot of this material before I got there, and one reason she knew she wanted me to be there, the commissioner, because there was a program called School to Work, and it was all about what I'm talking about, workforce development, attitudes, values, and beliefs in the curriculum. And they even had documents from the Federal Department of Labor that were even produced before Clinton got there, under George Bush Sr. The SCANS report, Secretary's Commission on Achieving Necessary Skills. They had job categories for students. And if they're going to be a truck driver, they need less reading than a secretary. If they're going to be a janitor, they need less reading, writing, and math than, other job categories. There was a sample resume that had a number rating for honesty. It was a sample, wasn't a real kid, but it was in the book from the Federal Department of Labor. A number rating. So how do you rate honesty? Right now we have a governor who's sometimes with it, getting it, sometimes not. I thank God he gets it part of the time, because the other person wouldn't have gotten any of it right. And, I voted for him, but his wife has been doing meetings with what she calls her Foundation of Hope. She says that hope can be measured and trained. Really? Hope? My hope is in nothing but the Lord Jesus. That's where my hope is. I don't want my children's hope measured and trained by the state at any rate. And I don't think the state needs to be teaching Christianity either. I mean, what doctrine? We can't do that. But we need freedom of conscience, right? Freedom. That's what America is supposed to be about. So I'm telling you a lot of things that are a little discouraging maybe, but hopefully motivating. Hopefully you'll see the importance of what you do as a citizen, a parent, a teacher, a grandparent, a neighbor, a friend, aunt, uncle, to go and help other people. Like Jamie said, sometimes we have people that are very zealous to fight for freedom, but they've got to be careful that they don't make false accusations about things that aren't really that way. You can have a teacher that's really doing a great job, but this is a system that she may not have a choice. Well, she wouldn't have a choice if it's locked in by the administration. When I was in the Department of Labor, there were child labor laws that we looked at. I was over that area as well. And I know recently I heard there were like hundreds of kids found, underage children working in meat packing plants and places like that. So when you get into job training categories for kids in school, you've got to start looking at all of that too. You know, if they're going out to be an apprentice, how safe is it and what is their age? The school to work was so radical in some places, and we did get that vetoed. Governor Keating, I was in his office that year in '95. A bill went through to tie us to the federal plan for school to work. It passed the House, Senate, went to the governor. He vetoed it. Tulsa World wrote bad things about him and cartoons about him being on a psychiatric couch listening to Linda Murphy. And so just be prepared that, you know, some people do not get it. They don't understand. And we also got stopped the use of Social Security numbers because there were even some Republicans meeting with the state superintendent to use Social Security numbers on all student data as it went into the computer. What's wrong with that? Well, it's efficient, isn't it? And that's what a lot of this is. People get blind to the fact that they're creating an efficient system. You know, we can measure. Someone was telling me earlier about some of the good things about identifying some issues with kids and finding them, and that can be good, but we don't need that data stored in a computer system. That needs to be for that teacher, that parent, that student. So that's another problem with what's going on with Amplify and these online programs. Every state receives some state longitudinal data system directives when they got stimulus money under the Obama administration. You had to build a state longitudinal data system. And that means you've got one. How much is it being used? What kind of data is in there? All of that should be accessible to the public. You know, in other words, what are the parameters? What are they putting in there? And building a profile for students so it can be from cradle to grave, you know, that's an efficient system. And for workforce, knowing how many kids are on what level with reading and how many engineers are we going to have, and, you know, the German system has done this kind of control and tracking for a long time. And some people from Tulsa went, before Governor Keating was elected, Governor Walters, who was a Democrat, had sent an entourage from Tulsa Chamber of Commerce to Germany. And we had a couple of German companies, still do, Siemens and another one. And that's, you know, jobs are great. Jobs are great. But they go over there, and we got a letter in the governor's office, which I got, from the German government thanking the governor, and it wasn't even Governor Keating that sent them, but thanking him for sending this group from Tulsa to learn how to implement the German system of education. We've got a philanthropist in Tulsa, $13.9 billion in wealth now. George Kaiser, Kaiser Francis Oil, Bank of Oklahoma. He funds a lot of this stuff, and especially in Tulsa, but really all over the state, not all over the state, but at the state level. He's controlling some early childhood programs with his people that he's got on those committees. He's had Bill Gates in Tulsa. He signed the Giving Pledge with Gates and Warren Buffett and the rest of them that did that. And the UN Pledge, you know, Bill Gates signed the UN Pledge regarding education. George Kaiser told the New York Times in 2016 in an interview that Tulsa was his beta city, his test city. He's building a smart city as far as he can get it built. And there are people that know about this and are concerned about this, but a lot of it is being done and a lot of data being collected with these students. they're going to need, in an economy that works well with some of the jobs that will be available, they want a lot of workers that aren't on such a high level. So I don't think the reading scores are bothering some of them too much. They think in the long run they're going to get jobs for these kids, and they'll have a training program for them. But what was their potential, that was never realized because they didn't get that individual learning experience. Research has shown us for a long time that relationship with a teacher who interacts with a student and shows she cares. There are kids that won't try if they think the teacher doesn't care. Have you ever heard your kids say that? I have. Mine was in college and said, I don't even like this situation he was in. He said, we're just in the computer all the time. She just assigns us to the computer. We sit there, never talks to us. He said, I want to be in a class where I have a teacher, even as a young adult. And he's not a dependent kind of kid. In fact, he's quite independent. But there are things about human interaction that are necessary, especially in lower elementary. So, just take a real close look what you're doing. I can't tell you what to do. You're already doing it. What I know to tell you, keep doing it. And it isn't hopeless as far as wasted effort. Had we not pushed back in the 90s and repealed OBE, had we not repealed Common Core as a statewide mandate, we would have been much further down the road with all of this by now. So C-Scope got pushed back in Texas. I know there was tremendous pushback. There were hearings. There were lots of parents that testified. I watched a lot of those videos at the time. So, your efforts are important. So let me just ask if you have any questions. Let's do that. Okay. Sure.